Okay, good evening. I'm Sundiata Keita Cha-Jua, your host for Real Talk, History as a Weapon for Black Liberation. Our guest today is Dr. Akinyele Umoja. Dr. Umoja is professor of African American Studies at Georgia State University. He is the author of the most popular and exciting and groundbreaking work, We Will Shoot Back: Armed Resistance and the Mississippi Freedom Movement. It was named the 2014 Anna Julia Cooper CLR James Award for the best book in Africana Studies by the National Council for Black Studies. He is also co-editor of the Greenwood Press Black Power Encyclopedia on the Reference and User Services Association, a division of the American Library References for Adults. Umoja is also the editor of a special issue of the Black Scholar on the legacy of his comrade and revolutionary activist, attorney, and late mayor of Jackson, Mississippi, the Honorable Chokwe Lumumba. Umoja's research has been featured in several other journals and anthologies. Professor Umoja is also very engaged in social justice advocacy. Along with his wife, Aminata, and other comrades, Umoja organized Atlanta's Malcolm X Festival in 1989, which is now attended by thousands annually. Umoja received acknowledgments from the National Conference of Black Political Scientists, the National Council for Black Studies, for his activism. Due to his civic engagement and scholar-activism, he was inducted into the Selma, Alabama's Hall of Resistance in the Enslavement and Civil War Museum during the annual bridge crossing and Jubilee celebration. Brother Akinyele,
How you
let me
doing?
bring you in. Brother, it is a pleasure to have you on the show.
Man, I'm
Um,
honored that you would have me.
I want to say that I've always admired you and your work. And man, we go back,
I was gonna say.
brother. I think it was my first year at Tougaloo, so it would have been 1976.
Yeah, it was somewhere in there. It was somewhere in the mid 70s.
Yeah, boy.
I
Wow.
met you on campus.
Yeah.
Everybody was saying, you need to meet Sundiata. You need to meet Sundiata. And we met, and I always tell folks that you and I both had big afros then. I think
Yeah.
that was your first semester there?
That was my first semester, yes.
Okay, because you
Came
were
in the winter.
actually the activist on campus, which
Yeah.
is why everyone was saying you got to meet Sundiata. I assumed that you were inviting your senior year, but
No. I was in my junior year. I transferred in from a community college. I was
got
only there 3 semesters, man. I was taking 24 and 25 credit hours a semester, bro.
gotcha,
Yeah.
gotcha. Yeah, so we've known each other since then, since that time, and really reconnected at at a sala.
And a solid. What,
Yeah.
about 82?
No, it was
No.
it was maybe
No,
like
it was later than that.
it was in
Yeah,
the
it was like 92.
Yeah, it was in the 90s. I was working in
Yeah,
Morehouse at the time.
yeah. Absolutely. So, look, Brother Emoji. So, on Real Talk, History as a Weapon for Black Liberation, we try and keep it informal. So,
Yes,
it's
sir.
going to be brother. No, we're not doing the doctor thing, right?
Yes,
It's just be brother. And I'd like us to have more of a conversation, like when we was at Asala
right.
at the bar, but not quite
Right.
like at the bar.
Right. Oh no.
So, but I'm gonna urge you to be comprehensive
Okay.
and succinct, right? Try and do both. I know it's a tight work, and always begin with biographical questions. And even though shit, I don't want to say how long we've known each other since '76. however long that is, there's still things about you that I don't know, and there's things that I would like our audience to know. And so I'm a devotee of my good friend Bill Cross,
Mm-hmm.
Negrescence theory,
Mm-hmm.
Negro to Black conversion.
Right.
So I always work that in at the beginning, right? Because I want to process that. So my first question to you is, you're born in LA, but you were raised in Compton.
Mm-hmm.
If I get something wrong, just correct me.
No, that's
Now,
correct.
so my first kind of question is this: were you old enough to recognize the difference in the two communities, or given that you lived in Black neighborhoods, was it virtually the same, right? And then LA, or are they from the South? Because I know a lot of folk from California are out of Louisiana and Texas.
Right.
And the big question for you in terms of this opening montage is, how did the era or the historical period in which you grew up in Compton, how did that moment and that place and your class background influence your intellectual and activist choices?
Man, I've always lived in a Black community. I don't have any other experiences. I was born in LA, and then my family moved. My father was a minister. My family
Where in LA?
in South Central LA,
Okay.
area around today is, I think, was 80th and Zamora was the family residence, which is on the east side of LA. Um, but we moved a couple of weeks after. We were in Arizona. We were in Oklahoma City. By the time I was in uh, starting the first grade, we moved back to Compton. And there's a trip about us moving to Compton because Compton used to be a majority white city.
I
And
actually didn't know that.
yeah, it was a majority white city. You look at the yearbook from Compton High in the 1950s, it's all white. They have a few Black people.
Right,
And
right,
so,
right.
but we went to visit my aunt, I remember, from Oklahoma. And when we were in Oklahoma, moving back, going back to Compton, we just went for a visit. And she was her and her husband were one of the first Black folks to live in that neighborhood. When we moved there a couple of years later, it was all Black.
It don't take long for them to leave.
And after the Watts uprising, that just cleared them all out. So now my parents, my father is from the Mississippi Delta, born in Bolivar County, um, a place called Alligator, Mississippi. My father was a sharecropper until he was in his late 20s. And then he had the opportunity to go to a Christian school in Nashville that had an adult program. And so he went to their secondary program. That same school, Nashville Christian Institute, is where Malefi Asante went. So I've known him since I was a kid because my father was one of his mentors. And then Fred Gray, who's the attorney for Rosa Parks, he also went to that high school. But my father's from there. He was able to get into Pepperdine. He's one of the first Blacks to go to Pepperdine. That's where he got his bachelor's degree. My mother was born in Wewoka, Oklahoma, a town founded by the Black Seminoles. But our family are not Black Seminoles. My family moved there after my grandfather got into some rumbles with some white folks in northern Louisiana. My mother was the first child born there. My grandfather was a sharecropper, sold a little bootleg liquor. He
Okay.
ended up had to move to LA after he got caught gambling the white man's cattle, the white man whose plantation he was working and he left and went to LA, and my grandmother didn't move with him. And so my mother stayed there. She was a valedictorian at her high school, and I think she could have went to Tuskegee in the nursing program, but she decided to move with the rest of her siblings in LA, where she went to school and met my father. and my mother ended up being a civil servant, working first as a clerical worker in federal government, and then she ended up becoming a mid-level manager in Social Security, in the Social Security Department. So that was my upbringing. In terms of class, I would say my father being a minister, but he wasn't a minister in
In a big church.
had no big church back then. A moderate sized congregation. Then he went to a smaller congregation when there was some conflict at the church, some factional struggle. And so I grew up basically in a working class neighborhood. Um, you know, basically a working class neighborhood. A lot of my friends, their parents were working class folks. We didn't have like a lot of lawyers, doctors, anything in the particular neighborhood I grew up in. Certainly, there was some in Compton. There's an area of Compton called Richland Farms, and that's where all the lawyers, the doctors, people who end up running the city when Compton developed a black electoral majority and was able to vote black folks in. So most of them lived in that area. We called them farm boys. I didn't have enough sense at the time because they had horses and stuff out there. We associated them being country. We didn't realize that their parents were the ones running the damn city. And their houses were bigger because I didn't really venture over there. I stayed pretty much in the hood. And so,
that is interesting. So look, here's the question. What was the impetus for you to become a Black Scholar activist? Because if I'm reading the material correctly, by the time of your freshman year in college, you get deeply involved in the Muhammad Ahmed
Defense Committee,
right? You also very close to that same time period, within a year or so, or 2 years or so, you're on the staff of Soul Book, the Revolutionary Journal of the Black World, and you're engaged in revolutionary nationalist activity. So, what led you at such a young age into political work?
Man, well, number one, I have to give credit to some of my family members. I had a cousin who was in the Air Force, and he and my uncle, my cousin would come home. I really looked up to him. He was years older than me, and he told me to read the autobiography of Malcolm X. My uncle who taught me how to drive and things of that nature. Both of these guys I considered to be cool. And they told me to read the autobiography of Malcolm X. It had a tremendous impact on my life. I will say when I was 11 years old was the year of the Watts uprising. Okay. And when Watts occurred, I see the power of Black people. Muhammad Ahmed discussed it in one article as the disruptive capacity of Black people, how it stopped everything, right? Everybody had to relate to that. And then I also saw the National Guard as an occupying force in our community.
Now, when you say you saw that, right? I know that's the way
I define it today.
Was describing it, but you're 11.
Let me put it in context.
How did you actually see it? I mean,
let me put it in context for you.
Yeah.
Okay. I mentioned my father was a minister, and the church was selling barbecue to raise money. And it wasn't you come to the church and pick up your barbecue, you go to deliver it. And so my mother pleaded for my father to leave me at home. But during that time, the clear passage through the Watts neighborhood was to throw up 3 fingers. And my father said he knows how to put up his 3 fingers. So we out there, in the midst of all the expropriation, or what people call looting. We out there doing all of that. And then I see the National Guard. Now, my naive 11-year-old self, I'm speaking to the National Guardman. The dude trains his weapon on me. So yeah, Another point, the church has a revival that weekend. My uncle is speaking there, and he's the minister there at that time. I'm speaking at the revival. The young people, we hear sirens go down the street, and when we run out, we see National Guardmen, and they see these children run out, and they train their weapons on us. So automatically, whatever type of illusions I had about what side they were on were clearly saw. And then it's like after that, reading stuff like Malcolm. And I used to love to go to the library. And you mentioned Muhammad Ahmed. I remember I probably was in high school at this point. There was a book that was put out by one of these anti-communist organizations. And I happened to look in the book, and they had a picture of Max Stanford, and it said he was one of the most dangerous men in America. And I was like, this guy must be cool.
You ran toward him.
Consciousness of our people. So I always wanted to know more about him. And then later on, I would read his articles in the Black Scholar as I matured. And it's just things like, Black Panthers coming to our school, and they would give us the newspaper. They wouldn't even sell us a newspaper. And then I learned basically in high school identification with national liberation struggles in other places, because I would see them talk about Palestine. I would see how they dealt with African liberation movement. So a lot of it was reading stuff, the impact of the rebellion, and not even just family members. There were other people. I remember being in church one time, and someone, it could even been my father, mentioned in the Vietnam War, and one of the brothers I looked up to told me, I ain't fighting in no white man's war. And of course, Ali had a tremendous impact on me.
Yeah.
I remember being in the ninth grade in our school system at that time. You were in the ninth grade in junior high, and then you would go to high school in the 10th grade. Okay. And so they sent the ROTC officer, by the school to recruit us into ROTC. And he said, how many of you young men want to join ROTC after he did his spiel? None of us raised our hands. And so
how many young men were there?
Oh, I'm assuming it was a class of about 30, so about 15. But then the teacher baited us. Teacher was a Texan. We called it, our nickname for him was George Wallace, the white guy, his Spanish teacher. But he said, well, you asked for how many young men want to join. We don't have anything in here but boys. Every male in the class raised their hand but me. And one of the sisters in the class said, you gonna let him call you a boy? I said, he ain't gonna call Muhammad Ali a boy. So I ain't gonna, a few of my friends heard that and put their hands down. So there were some beacons of consciousness out there that kind of helped my transformation. Older people in my family. I even remember when I was in the 10th grade, my sister started UCLA. The Angela Davis controversy was going on about Angela Davis being a communist, teaching in the public school system, a public university. And so it was a lot of drama about her teaching. My sister went to the class. The family was pressuring her about getting enrolled in the class. But my sister brought me home Angela's writings on Frederick Douglass, other things. She would tell me about things in the class. And I will say my sister was like, when I was in junior high, she was like, when you come to high school, you got to be wearing an afro. You got to listen to this type of music, listen to John Coltrane. So again, there were a lot of people who kind of were guiding me along the way, I would say, and influenced me in certain type of ways. And I can't leave out the importance of the rebellion in terms of me seeing the power of Black people, but also seeing how the military forces were treating us as kids. I was a child. And having a gun pulled on me.
So now, you immediately, as near as I can tell, like, I think it's a myth, but a lot of people say that people are in various organizations and follow various political trends and jump around. I think Phenome Wilkins once said that in the era, folks tried on a political ideology like they changed their clothes. I always thought that was bullshit because I didn't have that
No, but I
wide range.
knows some stuff.
So, but when I look at you, it seems like you started off a revolutionary nationalist, and you're a revolutionary nationalist today.
Right. I would agree with that.
So talk about you, but you're in LA, you're at UCLA, and you're probably there right after the Black Studies controversy. I assume you're there probably what, 3 years?
Years after, and my sister was there the following year. She
When
was
Bunchy and
John were killed in January
the shooting.
'69, and my sister was there in the fall
Yeah.
of '69. And
Okay.
so, but I was there. I started in the fall of '72. I only stayed
Okay.
there a year, but
Yeah, so a few years.
right.
But why did you gravitate to a revolutionary nationalist position as opposed to join us,
Right.
right? Kawaida,
Right.
cultural nationalists, because all of that is around you. The Panthers are around. What was the basis upon which you made your decisions, House of Umoja, African People's Party?
Well, part of it was proximity. The Panthers were stronger where I lived. And there was also another group that had impact in our neighborhood. They weren't there by the time I got to high school, but when I was in junior high, you had the Malcolm X Foundation that became some of the founders of the Republic of New Africa. So you had those two groups that were there, and then just so I didn't really have a lot of contact with us organization.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I had more contact. Plus, even prior to the Black Panther Party, I really identified with H. Rap Brown. And I really loved to hear his speeches when I could hear them. Of course, they weren't, we'd hear little tidbits. We didn't have YouTube and those type of things. But then, we had those recordings. You might remember, I think it was a Flying Dutchman label came out.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Leon Thomas. So,
yeah.
really
I play that
that
for my students
part.
every year. I play that Rap Brown speech, Jamil Alameen speech,
Right.
every year for my students in the Black Freedom Movement class. Absolutely. It's
I tell
brilliant.
you what else? I remember I think it was the Saturday Evening Post. That's when I first started Black Panthers. They had an article that talked about Huey Newton shooting a police officer. And they talked about the Sacramento piece when the Panthers. So I was like, damn, who are these brothers? I think I had to be in high school when I read that. But as I went through high school, was more and more I read. Of course, I remember reading Blood in My Eye, maybe in 11th grade, and then not Blood in My Eye, Soledad Brother, and
Soledad Brother, yeah.
And then Blood in My Eye when I was a senior. So all of those readings would have an impact on my ideological thinking. It just so happened, like I said, I had heard about Max Stanford, Muhammad Ahmed. Here's another family influence. My mother, during my senior year, she had was being trained for a promotion, and so she would go to San Francisco. One time, one of the trips, she came home with a issue of the Black Scholar, and gifted me the Black Scholar, and it had an article from Max Stanford on Afro-American nationalism in the Black student or something like that. I can't remember that. And so I read more. And then when I'm at UCLA, I started working for NOMO, the Black newspaper. And one time I'm sitting in the office and then we get a call and they're asking for people to join the Muhammad Ahmed Defense Committee. And so that's how I got plugged in there. I volunteered to go because I had been reading about him.
Right.
Like other issues of the Black Scholar, and he laid out in the Black Scholar the program of the African People's Party.
Yeah.
I just resonated with it. I said, I've been thinking about stuff like this on my own. So
I remember reading that same article, because
yeah,
what I was taken aback by is that he had basically taken Lenin's idea of a revolutionary party and
right.
blackenized it. So yeah.
What I realized later on. I looked at some of the things that were African People's Party documents, and he basically took the program of the Vietnamese Communist Party. We would call that plagiarism today. I didn't realize it till I saw it later, but yeah. So yeah, he took Lenin's program and, like you said, blackenized it, tried to indigenize it to a certain extent, I would say.
Yeah, not a great extent.
No,
But a certain,
more application probably needed. But hey, there was some things that's in that article though I still resonate with today. One of the things I know in that program, African People's Party, he talks about, or the program talks about the necessity of a general strike. And the power of a general strike. And I'm like, folks do not talk about that as a potential power. When I talked about how what I saw from the Watts Uprising, it was a disruptive capacity. So what things do Black people have? Of course, own work, I look at the boycotts, so boycott strikes or things, tactics or methods we can utilize to empower our people. When we talk about one of the things that concerns me, even in our current conversation, I know I may be jumping ahead, but around reparations, oftentimes it's not talked about things we could utilize to win our reparations demands, but through really organized resistance. I think that's going to have to be employed, particularly if they're going to be significant reparations for our people.
I agree with you. Since we're there, we might as well, we're there. So I've always been deeply concerned by the overemphasis of the lawyers. You cannot win reparations in U.S. courts. And at this point, we don't have the power. Africa isn't united and isn't capable of bringing that kind of weight on the international community. And we don't have the support of the Chinese. I don't know what they are, but
right.
So the point is that we have to rely on our people. And the current way the Black bourgeoisie that seems to have put themselves at the head of the reparations movement, they think that this thing is going to come through a blue ribbon panel appointed by the president or Congress.
Right.
And then they're going to make a proposal. And, and that's the way this operates. And that seems like such an elite process. And so my question has always been, there's an overemphasis on, not my question, my position. There's an overemphasis on the economic side of reparations and not enough discussion about the politics. And by the politics, I mean that the main thing we lost as a people was sovereignty.
Right.
We were captives. We lost sovereignty. We were from other nations, ethnicity, nationalities. If reparations isn't about a return of autonomy,
right?
If it isn't about a process in which we are able to organize our people for dual power, right? Pending self-determination, then I can't really get down with this bourgeois thing.
No, I hear you. Well, one of the things I borrowed from you and maybe plagiarized, as I heard you do a presentation at a sala. I'm trying to remember the year.
Hmm.
Um, you know something? I'm not sure you mentioned this in your
You know
presentation,
what?
or
I
you
know
probably
what you're talking about. That was the centennial of Asala in Memphis.
yes,
Jerry
we remember.
Horn, me, VP, were
Right. Well,
doing it
I
for
tell
this
you
kind of
what, I'm
proliferation.
I'm
Yeah.
not sure because there were a couple of things. One, you came to the not a plenary, but the session I was in on reparations, and I know you mentioned it during the discussion. I
Okay.
can't remember if you mentioned it there or you mentioned it in the panel you did with VP and Gerald Horn. Uh, but you said you talked about, as opposed to a small commission, you talked about organizing people's assemblies across the country that would be
Yes.
more
Yes. Yes. Yes.
inclusive of our people. I think from that we could get richer demands. It'd be an opportunity to politicize more of our people, and it provides a vehicle for greater mobilization to challenge around that. So that's something that I agree with too. I think it's not just the question of the lawyers, but it's
Right.
also the question of relying on lobbying
Mhm.
legislative bodies to bring this about. Now, excuse me, I am encouraged by the development of local
Oh
um,
yeah. Yeah.
force, but I think, but that's this mobilization and community organizing uh, for around the questions of reparations, I think is, even with the local initiatives, can be taken to a higher level, need to be taken to a higher level for us to get something more substantive, which I agree. When the United Nations talks about forms of reparations, the first one is restitution. Restitution
Hmm.
is not just about um, money. It's not about money at all. It's about, again, restoring people to the status they were in prior to the harm. And
Yeah.
for us, as you state, that's a question of us being self-determined, of us
Hmm.
being able to determine our own destiny. Now, uh, I I think we as a people are very diverse, and not all of us want the same things.
That's right.
Of course, and you mentioned there's a class dimension, and of course, there are several people in more elite classes of our people. They want to be a part of the state, and they want to be a part of capitalism. You
Yeah.
know, so but I think it gives us a tremendous opportunity to really have these discussions amongst our people and to raise our consciousness and really our expectations. Um, from the period of time that you and I were young men,
Yeah.
uh, I think one of the things the movement, Black liberation movement overall, is lacking is that question of vision. I mean, we during our time, we were thinking about sovereignty, we were thinking about
Yeah.
Pan-Africanism, we were thinking about socialism. Today, demands are very much more reformist. Um,
There's a lack of political education. The time I spent with working under Mario Padelli
mhm.
was very formative, right? Uh, and we engaged in political education. And in
Right,
fact, even before I went to Mississippi and worked with the RNA, back home in Decatur, uh, the older brothers in something called the Effective Community Force, a Panther-like organization, right?
mhm,
Everywhere you may not have had Panthers, but you had Panther-like
right,
organizations,
right,
Panther adjacent. They often did study groups. In fact, I read Black Awakening in Capitalist America as a teenager as part of a study group with the guys in the ECF were probably 21 to 30 something.
mhm,
Um, but
mhm,
they brought us teenagers in because we had a youth organization. They brought us in and we participated in those things. And I think that one of the things that's lacking is intergenerational, um, and just an emphasis on political education.
Right. It's funny that you said intergenerational, and the oldest cat was 30. But
Today, he'd be a
there
youth.
wasn't a lot of folks like us around here.
Yeah, things have changed, man. Things have changed. But look, I want to go back through some more history of the movement, and I want to raise something like when I was at Tuglu. In fact, I took my name from one of the journals that existed in that period. You know, when I was in high school, I had taken the name Sundiata,
Mm.
and I took Keita, but I was trying to find a last name, and in high school I used Mwiliu because it meant black. But when I got down to Tugalu, its name to Kitabu Cha-Jua, the Book of the
Ah,
Sun,
right,
right?
right, right, right.
And that's how I got my last name, Cha-Jua. That's how I took it
I
from
didn't
reading
know
that journal. So that was a very popular journal at the time. You had the Liberator coming out of New York,
that.
which is
Right,
a bit earlier, right? That's
right,
more mid to late 60s. And of course, you had the Black Scholar
right.
out of Oakland, Black World out of Chicago, and the Kitabu Cha-Jua, the former book of black poetry out of San Francisco.
Journal of Black
And
Poetry.
then you had Soul Book out of LA, which you worked on.
Well,
And so
Soul Book
part of my,
actually originally comes out of the Bay Area.
which does
It
the
originally
Soul
comes
Book.
out of the Bay Area.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it originally comes out of the Bay Area. It was 1964 is its roots. If you remember the Afro-American Association formed
Yes.
by Donald Warden. Um, just like the folks in the Black Panther Party, and to some degree, even Maulana Karenga, some of the younger people who were in Afro-American Association didn't resonate with the pro-capitalist point of view of Donald Warden.
Yeah.
And I think the founders of Soul Book were very much influenced by the Cuban Revolution and other anti-imperialist struggles.
And
And
that's
so
Mamadou.
Mamadou Lumumba, Ernie Allen, even though he doesn't like us to talk about it like that, but Ernie Allen were the two key people. Ernie Allen, for those that don't know, he's a professor emeritus from University of Massachusetts.
Who was also involved in the League of Revolutionary Black Workers.
Exactly. And both of them were the same year they formed Soul Book. They also connected with the Revolutionary Action Movement. And so they formed Soul Book in 1964. The first issue was dedicated to Medgar Evers, to Patrice Lumumba, to Felix Mumier, who was a nationalist, a revolutionary nationalist, I should say, out of Cameroon. Was I think it was also dedicated to the 4 young girls killed in Birmingham. So it had, and to Antonio Maceo from Cuba. So it had this Pan-African flavor, but a very much anti-imperialist flavor. Another thing that was in that first issue, and I think Ernie might have wrote this. They criticized this group, Afro-Americans for Goldwater. So they were criticizing Black people identifying with the right wing at that particular time. And so, but it was in 1964 in the Bay Area that it developed, and they connected in that same year with the Revolutionary Action Movement. So the people who founded the League of Revolutionary Black Workers, General Baker, Charles Simmons, Luke Tripp, all of them were part of it. Max Stanford was a part of it. And so they all connected in Nashville, Tennessee, and made
Ken Cockrell, man. We can't forget Ken Cockrell.
Ken Cockrell wasn't a part of that.
He wasn't part of that initially. Okay.
Yeah. He would hook up with them in the league later, but they were all went to Wayne State together, and they had a group called Uhuru, meaning freedom. And so but even prior to that, there was a connection they made in Cuba where they met Robert Williams. Robert Williams was one of the key figures to pull some of these elements together when we talk about the development of what we call revolutionary nationalism. And RAM is the first, I would say, Revolutionary Action Movement is the first group to utilize that terminology, revolutionary nationalism. Prior to that, I think it was Harold Cruz who wrote an article.
Yeah, 62.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think they resonated with that terminology. But they're
Afro-American and revolutionary nationalism.
Pardon?
The Afro-American and revolutionary nationalism.
Exactly. And so Cruz. This group of young people met in Cuba. Mamadou Lumumba wasn't there, but Ernie Allen was there. Another brother, man, I'm trying to remember this brother.
What's the famous trip that Baraka is also on?
Now, Baraka and Robert Williams and John Henry Clark, they're there like in 1960, right? Yeah, but this is 1964. Robert Williams is here. Okay. Robert and Mabel are there as exiles at this point.
Okay.
And so they come, all of these young people were there coming, and I think they traveled. It wasn't the Vincent Ramos Brigade, but maybe Progressive Labor Party that sponsored a trip to Cuba. And that was the way that most of them got down there. I think Max Stanford somehow got there on his own. But but you know, they met at that time down there, and they actually called themselves the Black Liberation Front. And that was
here's what I want to do. Here's my question, right? So we got these journals.
Yes.
The Liberator, the Black Scholar, Black World, the Book of Black Poetry, which becomes Kitabu Cha-Jua, and we got Soul Book. Today, when I see people citing things, the new young scholars, right? They can't get around the Black Scholar and Black World, but they do talk about the Liberator. And sometimes they talk about, at least the cultural folks talk about the Book of Black Poetry or Kitabu Cha-Jua. Why is Soul Book out of the conversation? Why do you think that is? And what needs to be done? You know, I'm telling you, man, I spent so much time in the Tougaloo Library reading Soul Book. I mean, it was amazing for its historical era. But you can only find 10 copies on the internet. What's, talk to me about what we're going to do to make Soul Book and get what's in there into these dissertations, these new books, and in political education classes that organizations are running.
Good question. We've met with some of the founders because I was too young to be a founder. I was when they founded in 64. I was what?
You was 10.
10 years old.
9.
And in fact, and so some of them have passed on, some of them are still around. But we talked about republishing it. We've done some work already to republish some of the major issues. And besides the major issues, they would have specials. And they dealt with questions like the Vietnam War. In fact, they republished stuff from the Vietnam War. They translated some of the articles, France Fanon, that came out of Presence Africaine before they were published in English. They translated Cheikh Anta Diop from out of Presence Africaine. So a lot of those intellectuals they introduced to people who would become elements of the Black Power movement.
Absolutely.
So they looked at struggles going on in the Caribbean. And so I became involved in 1973, I think, with Soul Book, when Mamadou Lumumba would come back from Guyana. He had political asylum in Guyana and actually was forced to return, was condemned by a lot of people in the Black Liberation Movement when he returned, because a lot of people were supporting the government of Forbes Burnham. And this is before Walter Rodney was assassinated. And then it became quite clear.
I was going to say, but it was, you're right. The assassination of Walter Rodney made it irrefutable, but it was fairly clear in the late 60s that Burnham understood how to manipulate African Americans by playing the cultural card and the race card against the East Indians,
Right.
Yeah.
And he utilized things like Aguzu Saba. Of course, one of the things that gave him a lot of legitimacy was really because of the lobbying of the great UC Quayana, and his wife was one of the founders of the Afro-American Association. Shwaiko Quayana, her birth name was Ann Cook, but she in particular lobbied to give political asylum. So you had people there from the Black Liberation Army, RNA, the House of Umoja, US organization. A lot of the organizations had political asylum there. So it gave Burnham a particular type of legitimacy with the Black Power movement. And he supported Pan-Africanism in a particular type of way. But like I said, he's doing that.
He published in the Black Scholar too.
Pardon?
Burnham published in the Black Scholar.
That's true. I think Marvin X maybe interviewed him in the Black Scholar. And that happened right after he sent Mamadou Lumumba, another brother by the name of Shango Umoja at that time, Adewale Umoja. He sent them back to the United States, and Shango actually had charges against him during that time. They claimed that they were involved in the internal affairs of the Guyanese politics, which wasn't true. They were being used as a scapegoat by Burnham again to kind of put repression on the movement back home. I mean, back in Guyana. And of course, you know, you also had the People's Temple, or the Jim Jones that occurred there a year or so after that.
Yeah, 77. Brother, what I just heard from you is you're going to do a piece talking about the history of Soul Book.
It's already written.
Okay, good. We need that out.
Already written.
We need that out.
I've already completed it. I had a home for it, but it hasn't come out yet. So I'm gonna have to seek some other alternatives to publish it. But it's already written. Wrote it some years ago, and I'm waiting on one of our friends. I don't want to mention his name to call him out, but was doing some edited volume on Black Power publications, and so I said I'll do so.
Okay.
So it's been completed. I'll send you a copy for your comments.
Yeah, please do. So here's the question I wanted to get at. We're looking at these journals. Why are so many of them in Cali?
Ooh, that's a good question.
I named 5 major journals, right?
Right.
The Liberators in New York, the Scholar, Black Scholar, which I had the privilege to be an associator to replace Robert Allen at a certain point.
Right.
Is in Oakland. Black World's in Chicago.
Right.
Book of Black Poetry, Kitabu Cha-Jua, is in San Francisco.
Liberator was in Harlem.
Book is starts in the Bay Area but migrates to LA. The Black population in California is not that large. LA doesn't have the same number of Black folk that you got in Chicago, New York. So why is there a concentration of radical Black nationalist Marxist work happening in Cali?
I mean, to some degree, I think you have to give some credit to the Afro-American Association, because you look at what comes out of Afro-American Association at that time. Brings together intellectual Black folks, but out of that group comes the Black Panther Party, Bobby Seale, Hugh Newton, comes us organization, Maulana Karenga, comes the West Coast RAM. So you have a series of people, even people like Cedric Robinson was affiliated with Afro-American Association. And then on the cultural level, you got Marvin X. So it became like a ground. And these are people who went different directions than Wharton.
Right.
More radical than Wharton in varying degrees.
Yeah. There's a range, but it bended left.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it created a environment for the springboard for a lot of intellectual activity. actually, Journal of Black Poetry, one of the reasons it was developed was, I think that some of the artists and some of the writers kind of felt the Soul Book had its own political orientation and they didn't have enough freedom there. So they decided to create something that was more independent.
Okay.
But even Journal of Black Poetry, I mean, you see some strong revolutionary national ideology reflected there. One of my favorite issues is when Roland Snellings, also known as Askia Touré, edited one of them, and he had writings from his piece "Song High," from his.
Man, I remember reading that.
Yeah, I reordered it. There was somebody that just because I couldn't find it online. Actually, I found the Kitabo Cha-Jua that came out with it, but I couldn't find his work of poetry, and so somebody recently, or his book of poetry called Song High. So I just recently, there's a journal. I'll send you the name of the journal who actually republished it, and I was able to purchase that whole issue. So I'm still looking for literature like I was as a junior high school student.
Hey, because these young folks aren't putting out much. So I want to switch, man. You've been a leader of NAPO and Malcolm X grassroots movement for decades, and you've had the opportunity to be involved in a lot of solidarity work. And I'm raising this question in light of Palestine, right? But you've been engaged in and have worked with intense work in Haiti with people around Haitian liberation, Venezuela, the Bolivarian Revolution, Cuba, and the Basque. Is it Basque or Basque?
Basque.
Basque. So can you talk about some of those experiences and why international solidarity is so important for our movement and the reshaping, the destruction of capital and the reshaping of the world into a humane place?
Well, I know Asada talks about it in the autobiography about how our enemies are international, and this is an international system, right? I know you mentioned political education before, and I know my teachers used to talk about if imperialism is strong in one place, then, or if it's getting weak in one place, they have to concentrate their efforts there. And so it was necessary for us to have a front here. So they couldn't really focus on the people in Vietnam or the people in Zimbabwe, or that we didn't think we wanted to provide solidarity to them, but one of the greatest levels of solidarity we could provide is to open up a front of liberation in the belly of the beast. And so I was always grounded in an international perspective. As getting in the movement, that's what my teachers taught. But I would also say in the solidarity work I've done other places, I've also talked to them about our struggle here. To talk about our struggle here as well. Again, our oppression is international, and we have to fight it on an international basis. We can't be narrow. And when we're talking about reparations, you mentioned that Africa is not strong enough yet to be a leverage.
Right.
So we gotta.
They're getting there.
Ever we can. Yeah, I'm encouraged by what's happening in Burkina Faso and Mali, and hopefully Niger. So we're praying and we're hoping and we're trying to provide support that we can for those liberation movements that we see developing. Hopefully the spirit of Sankara lives in those folks, and we're moving the struggle on the continent to a new level. And of course, I think not just all African people, but all of humanity, I think, owes Haiti a debt. Haiti,
Right.
the first Black republic in the Western Hemisphere. Our friend Leslie Alexander has a book, Fear of a Black Republic. I just want to give that book a shout out. It's one of the books I'm reading right now that's giving me inspiration. But when I say the whole world owes Haiti, is not only is way it inspired people like Denmark Vesey and Charles Deslone in Louisiana to organize revolts, but they provided solidarity for Bolivar and the folks in South America. They also provided support, material support, to people in Greece fighting against the Ottoman Empire. So Haiti kind of represents the Haitian Revolution, I would say, kind of represents sort of what they were saying in the movie about Wakanda. That didn't need to be isolationists. They needed to fight for the liberation of Black people worldwide. And so, I just see the importance of us supporting these international struggles. And I will say this as well. Going other places, and my wife, and Aminata and I were talking about the other day about how much we learn by traveling other places, traveling in other countries. You see things you don't see here. Now, of course, world struggle, world revolution is not a cookie cutter approach, but there are things I can learn. I remember going to the Basque Country in Spain. Is not like going to Haiti. Haiti is, very underdeveloped, but Spain wasn't. And so in the Spanish Empire, seeing this national liberation movement and seeing them have a youth wing, seeing them have a worker wing, a women's wing to their movement, it gave me feeling of possibilities of what we can do with a national liberation struggle inside these borders. They cooperatively own the movement cooperatively owned this newspaper that had a wide distribution, the newspaper of the Basque movement, wide distribution, very quality newspaper with even things like popular culture and sports. Had the political perspective in the editorials, things of that nature. They also had an electoral wing to their movement. Now I haven't stayed up and know the where they are at that time, but I don't know where they are right now because I've lost. Full disclosure, I don't have the same contacts as I had when I visited there in 1993. But
we do know that their solidarity economy is very well developed, and you were giving some examples of that, and clearly that's a model that we can, we have to make it fit to our context, but it certainly gives us some ideas.
Right, certainly a whole spirit of not just cooperativism, I would say.
Yeah.
But understanding that the cooperativism in and of itself wasn't going to bring about liberation, that you have to move toward controlling the means of production and moving in a socialist direction. Certainly they had that understanding.
I appreciate you saying that because people tend to forget, like a lot of people, when they talk about the survival programs, they either denigrate them as speaking of it as some kind of liberal turn and the rise to power of the women. And what they fail to capture is that it was survival pending revolution.
And I remember that.
Survival pending revolution.
And Huey put that out there.
I want to turn to some contemporary issues. Have you read Charles Blow's book, The Devil You Know, or are you familiar with it?
Yes,
His
I
main thesis?
and I saw the piece that he did that's on Prime Video right now, South to Black Power.
That's right. That's taken from the book.
Yes.
What's your thoughts on it? Can you react? How would you enhance it? What's your, what do you think about it?
Well, he has
a very mainstream guy.
Yeah, he has a liberal perspective, and and whereas I recognize it's not the same perspective I have about Black Power, it's consistent. I do see, like, he proposes um, a migration of Black folks to southern areas to create new majorities where Black people can have state power. For instance, that might make Stacey Abrams the governor of Georgia. Now we know,
Mm-hmm.
for you and I, Stacey Abrams being the governor of Georgia does not mean Black liberation or national liberation for our people. But um, if Stacey Abrams is governor of Georgia, do we have a greater possibility of getting Jamil Amin, if he's not released, at least taken out of the federal prison in Arizona back to Georgia, where his family could see him? So it's some different questions that could be raised. What could it do in terms of some significant reforms and harm reduction for Black people in certain levels? But there's certain questions come up. Of course, one of the challenges we see to liberal Black power is what occurred in Atlanta last year with Cop City, where
Yeah.
you had a Black city council voting to spend $90 million on more excessive policing and more militarization of policing, even, just a couple of years after 2020, when some forces were talking about defund the police. And so there's been a Black political power in a liberal framework and a capitalist framework would not mean liberation for Black people. But at the same time, I think the move to that he's suggesting could move Black people closer to self-determination.
Yeah, no, I think that's the point. And he acknowledges that point. He says that what it would do is severely reduce white supremacy. And thus it creates space. And that's what we need is political space to operate in.
No doubt. No doubt. I know right now, and I know we have concerns, and I say I'm living in Georgia, so we have concerns about things being passed like this divisive concepts law in education, their response to what they call critical race theory. So if you have a majority Black government, state government, would we be denied teaching about the enslavement of our ancestors, or lynching, or segregation, or about the theft and settler colonialism of indigenous people? Those type of questions it would be different possibilities. Right now, we're in a real fight around those type of questions. Just to give one small example, there was a grant that Georgia State University faculty got to teach African American history to Atlanta Public Schools teachers, K through 12 teachers, and it was blocked because of this divisive concept. Yeah. So even though they decided not to move on a university level with this legislation. They decided to focus on K through 12, but it still has impact on people on the university level trying to service people in high schools and middle schools and secondary school. I mean, elementary school. Excuse me.
So I'm really glad you brought that up because we're at a moment because Asala is working on an initiative for freedom schools, and we probably are thinking more along the lines of the Panthers Oakland School, more along the lines of the liberation schools, not the Children Defense Fund liberal freedom
Mhm,
schools, right?
mhm, mhm.
But the point is that we're seeing this tremendous attack on the teaching of Black history, and it started with a focus at secondary and elementary, but it's seeping into the colleges,
Oh, no doubt, no doubt.
and we've not we don't have a really good organized response to this. And so, what I'm wondering is, how do we get this threat on get our people to understand? Like, I've been studying a lot of the work that LaGarrett King has been doing out of that Center for the Education of K-12 in Black History, right? Up at the University of Pittsburgh. And one of the things he points out, there's only 12 states in the U.S. empire where the teaching of Black history is mandated. It's like Florida. They're running the
Right,
anti-CRT,
right,
anti-1619 project, so that what they really want to do, and this is what I think people miss, they're not trying to eliminate the teaching of Black history. They know they can't do that. What they want to do is teach an American capitalist distorted view of our history.
right,
We've not been able to put together a massive response. We got individual things happening in the state of Florida. You got 200 Black churches now that are teaching African American history. Pastors are weaving it into their sermons every Sunday. They're using Sunday school the way Denmark Vesey used Sunday school at a in Mother Emanuel Church
right,
in Charleston, right? He
right,
planned the rebellion.
right.
You
That's
know,
right.
Coaching Black history. So there's things bubbling, but they're disconnected at this moment. We need to coordinate it, and we need to make it a priority that we have to take over the teaching of our children.
Right. I agree with that 100%. Of course, my family is involved in the Colombo School here in Atlanta,
Right, right.
but also my I guess most of my family are involved in projects doing professional development with K through 12 teachers who want to have some content. But we also need to set up our independent institutions as you're doing through Asala, through our churches, community centers, of course. I know a freedom school was set up in Detroit that our friend Charles Farrow and
Yeah,
Ned Gloria House and others were doing. Uh, we got to use our own. We got to fight them, right? But we also got to build our own independent institutions and spaces where we can make sure this curriculum is shared with our youth and
ab-
adults as well.
absolutely. Now, on that note, are you familiar with the College Board's AP course in African American Studies?
But not intimately. I just read the press about it and signed the petitions and things of that nature.
I would put it in that line of liberal distortion. That the commitment to it, I was ambivalent toward it when it was first brought to the Association for the Study of African American Life and History as a project.
Uh huh.
Because the first thing I did was looked up the data. Only 10% of the students in AP courses are Black. So essentially, I thought the move
That
would be,
is that high,
yeah,
right?
but you have some people who think that it's more important to reach them than to reach us.
Right.
But the other piece about it is I find it hard to wrap my mind around this very simple proposition. Can an instructor who has a BA, is not a specialist, doesn't have a degree in African American studies, has not had a concentration in African American history, why would I give college credit to a course taught by that profile versus someone on my faculty at the university who area of concentration was African American history, and they either have a degree from a history department with their main field being African American history, or they have a Black Studies degree with their main field being historical studies. Why would I do that? Treat those two things as equivalent. That makes no sense to me.
They aren't equivalent, but I think we even have to reinforce what people in the academic or the Africana studies programs are doing with our history and culture. I mean, I'm real concerned. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
We need to do a lot more work in terms of what the content is, and including our rich history of resistance, perspectives about our culture. Yeah, but I agree with you. I just think
No, I want to go back to that. I want to go back to that because I had a question that actually raised this issue. Like, we come out of a generation that, however we got into academia, we had a life before. But some of us went straight to academia. But we approach this from the standpoint of not seeking to be public intellectuals,
right,
i.e., commentators, but we
right,
approach from the standpoint of being what Robert Christman called Black scholar activists. That
right,
we didn't want to just produce work that could be useful to the movement. We wanted to be engaged with the movement and produce work that was useful for the movement.
right.
This new generation, the last two generations, that's not been their 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 goals and objectives. And so I'm wondering, how can we get a greater yield of Black scholar activists, not rather than public intellectuals, out of the current generation of graduate students and young assistant professors? What do we need to do to move them back on track?
Well, I'm just in the back of my head. I'm hearing Milcar Cabral. It would
Class suicide.
social structure and national liberation, and he talks about that. Out of the colonial petty bourgeoisie,
Mm-hmm.
you have three sectors. You got those who are totally sold in with the colonial power. You got those who commit themselves to revolution, and the majority vacillate. So I think we got to get the ones we can get, and do organizing in our professional organizations to try to move those who are vacillating to a more uh, radical perspective, a more anti-colonial perspective, but not only get that perspective, but try to pull them into the struggle. A lot of that is going to be winning our students, winning,
Mm-hmm.
aligning with forces in the community that kind of force people, because a lot of it, if they left up to their own devices, they're going to choose their careers.
Yeah.
I,
The
I
rewards of
say it
that.
that way, but I'm gonna be honest. But that will be their choice, and so we
No,
have
no, you're right because the reward structure bends that
right,
way, and of course, they don't come out of the same fervent
right,
struggle because as you described your background, you were shaped in the fires of the furnace of resistance,
right,
right? Um, I come out the people in our age cohort, that's what we came out of. These people didn't have as much of a social movement, in particular, a
right,
social movement that valued political education
right.
to
And even
draw on.
the recent social movement, Black Lives Matter, but it didn't have the same ideological thrusts. And I don't know. I
I'm
mean,
not sure Black Lives Matter was a social movement. In fact, I don't believe it was. I think that it was something that had the possibility of evolving into a social movement, but I don't see the kind of institutional structures. Like, for example, what was their main communicative vehicle? Those of us who come out of, we're the children of Black Power. That's
right,
that's who you and I are. We
right,
were children when Black Power was shouted, and we grew up in that context.
right,
We've already talked about the journals, the
right.
newspapers that exist, right? But there was also real institutions, the Consortium of Independent Black Institutions.
Right.
There were, the African martial arts. There were theater companies
I
in
mean, even
every
National
aspect of
Outdoor Black
life.
Studies comes out of Black Power movement.
Yeah,
Uh,
we had institutions,
right,
younger people in, and these institutions were in every facet of life, right?
right.
And many of them were brick and mortar. You could take yourself into the Panther office. What institutions did these people build? Where's their cultural movement? We changed the base of R&B, right? It began to speak to the movement.
R&B
Um,
and Black classical music with some folks
and black,
like
yeah,
that. You know what I mean? Even they're during that time, the creation of labels like Strata East. Motown even had a whole division committed to Black arts and Black power. Right? That's how.
yeah,
Yeah.
black
So
form,
yes.
yeah, yeah,
No. Well, I'm a marinate on whether Black Lives Matter is a movement or not, but we just said was no no way compares to Black Power. I would agree with you on that.
yeah. So we're in that moment. But look, do you have any announcements or concluding statements before I go to the chat and start throwing questions at you?
Okay. Uh, well, just one announcement. If you're in the Atlanta area, on man, I have to give you the date, but we're going to be honoring the great Muhammad Ahmed, who's an elder. We talked about him in this conversation, and we're honoring him. We're bringing out a scholar that you and I both respect. Uh, it's on Saturday, February 24th, our annual Malcolm X banquet. But Robin Kelly will be the keynote speaker at that event, February 24th. So you can go to malcolmxbanquet.com if you're in the Atlanta area. If you can't come to Atlanta and you just want to support the event, again, go to malcolmxbanquet.com and you can buy an ad to salute Muhammad Ahmed, to salute the Malcolm X grassroots movement. We're also honoring, besides Muhammad Ahmed, we're honoring the activists of the Stop Cop City movement
Great.
for their resistance, and of course, there are political prisoners associated with that movement at this time. We want to show our love and solidarity to them. So that's one thing that's coming up that if folks can show their love and support, we would appreciate it. So go to malcolmxbanquet.com to get more information.
Okay, I want to give you a couple of questions. One is from a person who identifies himself as Sith Lord Prince.
Okay.
So I don't know what that means, if they fighting against the rebellion or what, if they're Sith Lord. But the question is, Dr. Umoja, what would you say should be the pedagogical anchors, tenets of a Black political education?
The pedagogical tenets of Black liberation education. And of course, I think it has to not only teach you what to think, but how to think. So it has to have some level of inquiry. At the same time, I think in anything, it has to be some fundamentals taught when we talk about any type of political education. So you would have to agree upon some foundations in education. Um, um, so, I would think it would have to give you some basics in terms of what are things like self-determination, what is capitalism, what is imperialism, what is settler colonialism, what is socialism, what is Pan-Africanism. So some foundation in terms of definition, but it also has to be something that's inquiry based. That it should challenge you to think, challenge you to research, challenge you to read, or to listen and think critically about what you're listening to or what you're reading. Why is inquiry based important? Because we want to build people who are independent thinkers. And if we're trying to build a society that's democratic, we got to build people who could think, and then people who could even challenge the teachers, right? You create a more vibrant society that way, as opposed to a society where people are just routinely just following somebody. It also has to deal with questions of patriarchy, right? So again, some fundamentals, but also some inquiry, and teaching people to be autonomous thinkers themselves.
I think you've addressed much of this, but Sith Lord comes back and says that he presumes that radical black thought would change not only what is taught, but how it is taught. And I think you were addressing that aspect as well.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree with that.
But
I would agree with that. I think it also has to include some action.
Repeat that.
And so it has to include some action. So in my teaching now, this stage of my career, I also engage students in doing some work that's activist work, right? But it could be research for activism, but it's not just something to do a paper that they're going to throw away at the end of the semester, all right? But it could be meaningful for other folk in our communities. And so, having some actual action, I think, if in a real sense too, I think it should engage. If we have the resources, it should. And we talked about earlier today the importance of travel. If people can go to other countries and the resources we have, I think that would be important as well. It should be global as well as local.
Joshua Ingram has a couple of things in here, and the first is a simple statement. He essentially is saying that we literally in here in a classroom-sized chat talking to these master teachers. So, in one sense, then Black Power Media and the shows that we have produced, and we might have close to 20 now.
Yeah, we're seeing a variety of things.
Education is a form is a space for political education. But I saw another question by Brother Ingram that I want to bring up. But I got to scroll through this for a minute. Okay, here it is. He wants to the article that both you and I read by Muhammad Ahmed that was in the Black Scholar. Was it called World Revolution and the African Political Party or something like that?
Man, he did about 4 or 5 articles, but I think this one had something about the Pan-African Revolution.
World Revolution and the Pan-African Party.
Yeah, he had another one that was just called a Pan-African Party. Let me see if I could find it, if I have it in my notes.
Yeah, Google it.
Well, I have some notes, I think, on my phone. where I was writing a reflection that went to the Black Scholar, and I talked about the article you mentioned earlier, Black Nationalism and Afro-American Student. That was the first one I read. But I'm gonna see if I can find these other articles. It was about 4 articles that he did. Here's another one called "The Roots of the Pan-African Revolution." That was the one that had the program of the African People's Party in, I believe. And then there was another, "We Are All Prisoners of War."
Okay, I remember that one.
Was
But
another
he
one.
got one that's World Revolution and the Pan African Party.
You know, and that's the one that
Yeah.
kind of plagiarized the
Lenin, yeah. Yeah, and you saying the Vietnamese party.
Yeah.
But look, let's give the brother a shout out now. Because he did put out at the 3 years ago, I think, at a Malcolm X ideological convention.
Right.
He was a speaker, and he had put together 2 volumes of his collective work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we
So-
need to actually, because they kind of, him and I think John Bracey helped him with this, the great John Bracey.
Yeah.
But put that together. But I think we need to do something that's really accessible, and maybe with a good publisher, and get it around. Because I think there were limited copies of what he shared with y'all.
Right. It was very limited.
But
he produced it
certainly one of the great thinkers of our movement, that was produced by our people, and he had a tremendous impact in the 1960s and early 70s. I think that, but he would sometimes keep a low profile, which is why he's not as well known as a Stokely or H. Rap Brown or Malana.
He was an organizer.
Like that. Yeah, he's an organizer. Actually, he told me this. He said that he met Bumpy Johnson. And in Bumpy Johnson's widow's memoir, she mentions him as one of the people Bumpy Johnson was in contact with. And he told me that Bumpy Johnson told him, like, look, you a thinker. You don't need to be out there giving these speeches. You organize. So,
brother, I got a Bumpy Johnson story for you.
Go ahead.
When Jamil H. Rap Brown went to New York, he had a meeting with Bumpy Johnson.
Whoa.
Remember, Emil ultimately was robbing those drug dens.
Right, exactly.
And he told Bumpy that the movement needed a cut from the numbers, right? And he said that in a speech. And Bumpy told him that he agreed with much of what he had to say, but he had to give the Italians $60,000 every week. And if Rap interfered with that, he'd kill him.
Well, now I heard something similar. Another story I've heard from some of Baraka's people, that Baraka, when they started the Black Arts Movement, and he was talking about dealing with the drug dealers, and then Bumpy summoned them and say, look, I like some of what you're saying, but you got to be careful. He was giving warning. Another story was that when there was the movement to get Black elected officials in Newark, New Jersey, one of my brothers I know who was connected to US organization said that a lot of their weapons came from Bumpy Johnson. But what does Bumpy Johnson benefit by moving the Italians out, and then he comes in?
Well, go back. You know, everybody has contradictions. No doubt Bumpy's a lumping. Right. But he was very close with Paul Robeson.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, that's an element, a class element that we have to talk about maybe at some other point, right?
Yeah, the Panthers Eldridge was absolutely wrong about the lumping.
Oh, no, I agree. I agree. But they're a group that have to be contended. And I think
absolutely they got to be contended
on a particular level too. He ain't the brother who breaks into your, your house, but he's on a more organized level, right? And so I think we do have to bring some analysis to that.
I agree, brother. We're at the ending time, and this was wonderful, man.
Yeah,
It's almost like we didn't even have the media here.
yeah, I forgot at some point.
You and I again.
I forgot at some points. So
All
yeah,
right, brother.
all
I'm
right.
gonna close us out, but
Okay.
nothing but love.
All right, peace and power
Peace.
to the family and all and your students up there.
And
Tell
the same, my brother.
don't
You
tell
know
them.
what's coming there.